This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The Guardian is reporting the editor of the New York Times, Jill Abramson, has confirmed that senior British officials attempted to persuade her to hand over secret documents leaked by the former National Security Agency contractor Edward Snowden. Abramson said she was approached by the British Embassy in Washington after it was announced that the New York Times was collaborating with the Guardian to explore some of the files disclosed by Snowden. Among the files are several relating to the activities of GCHQ, the agency responsible for signals interception in Britain. She said, quote, "They were hopeful we would relinquish any material we might be reporting on relating to Edward Snowden. Needless to say, I considered what they told me and said no." Thomas Drake, you worked for the National Security Agency. You were prosecuted by the U.S. government for attempting to leak information about what you were most disturbed by in the National Security Agency. Can you respond to this latest news of the British intelligence trying to get the head of the New York Times to hand over the NSA documents of Edward Snowden?
Well, it reminds me of the very reason why we had the first American Revolution and why there's a First Amendment to our Constitution. This is clearly a brazen attempt to remove from public disclosure and public interest the extraordinary revelations of Edward Snowden in terms of the institutionalized surveillance state and NSA's direct partnership with GCHQ, not just on an international scale. And so, this just strikes again at the reality that it's extremely dangerous in today's world and the United States as well as within the United Kingdom to speak truth to or of power, and if you do so, it becomes a criminal act. Yet the very individuals in the United States, through a whole litany of lies before Congress and the public, as has been clearly demonstrated over the last number of years, the fact that we've essentially had the equivalent of constitutional coup d'etat since 9/11. We've come off the rails in terms of the rule of law, and we're simply going to get all the data we can, no matter where it is and no matter what form it takes, because we just need it in case we need to protect our nation, ostensibly under that label and mantle of national security, which I've argued has really become the new state religion in the United States, and it's something you don't question.
Thomas Drake,
the First Amendment,
if you could say what happened to you and compare it to the case of Edward Snowden.
Well, I was there from the foundations of the secret surveillance state. Within just days of 9/11, it became known to me. I discovered, much to my horror, that Pandora's box had been opened up, and the United States had set aside the Fourth Amendment and had set aside the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. I mean, we have to remember this goes back to the 1970s, and so it was to my horror that I was eyewitness to the subversion of our own Constitution, a Constitution in which I had taken an oath to support and defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And so I knew that if I remained silent, that I would be complicit in the government conduct in violation of the rule of law and the Constitution, and I would not do so. And so I began a multi-year set of activities to blow the whistle on the secret surveillance programs that ultimately were the foundation in the first years after 9/11 that became institutionalized, and then we have the prima facie evidence, the documented evidence that Edward Snowden has disclosed with extraordinary conviction of courage to make it available in the public interest. You cannot have governance in the United States, without the consent of the governed. And what we have is a secret government who's governing out consent and is doing so in secret coercion.
Are Snowden's disclosures changing the way the NSA works? I want to talk about legislation right now. A Republican Congress member who co-authored the Patriot Act is poised to introduce a new bill to curb spying by the National Security Agency. Congressmember Jim Sensenbrenner helped to expand spying powers under U.S. intelligence agencies under George W. Bush, but now says the programs have gone too far. Colleen Rowley, why don't you take this one in Minneapolis, former FBI agent, Time Whistleblower of the Year. You worked for the agency for decades. What about what is being proposed now as a result of what Edward Snowden has revealed?
Well, in our visit, we were told, Edward Snowden, that he had begun the debate by disclosing to American citizens what was going on, this massive spying upon American citizens. We were happy to tell him the debate has begun, but he is very concerned, and this is actually the reason he has sacrificed so much, is that he wants to see these laws, these secret interpretations of law, I should say, fixed. And of course, the debate has begun. The Senate Judiciary has had hearings. They've heard, unfortunately, from Clapper and Alexander, who have not been truthful. For instance, Alexander has claimed that the NSA's massive spying has thwarted 54 incidents of terrorism affecting the United States. This was immediately debunked mostly by the press, and the FBI then later testified in hearings that no, it's really only one example they can come up with, and it's actually a very flimsy example of a case involving giving a few $1,000s to Shabab. So here's the problem. Senator Feinstein and others are able to kind of in a very misleading way revise history and claim that if NSA had been collecting the massive data before 9/11, these attacks would not have occurred. They can do this because many people have forgotten that the 9/11 Commission and the various inquiries concluded just the opposite of what Dianne Feinstein is saying. Back then, the rationale was that the dots were not connected, and the dots were not connected because there was too much intelligence flowing in. Officials claim that intelligence is like a fire hose, and we can't get a sip from a fire hose. That was the excuse for why they had all this information, specific clues, including hijackers or terrorist suspects who came into California, and CIA Director Tenet never told the FBI. Of course, the case in Minnesota where the FBI did not itself act upon intelligence, and the amount of intelligence that was not even read, let alone appreciated, assessed, and then acted upon. So this whole history is being revised and turned on its head now.
So this collection
to try
of
to
data,
thwart reform.
So this collection of data is actually hurting national security because there's too much information pouring in, and it's hard for them to sift through this. I wanted to go to Ray McGovern, former CIA analyst. Earlier this month, during a cybersecurity panel hosted by the Washington Post, former National Security Agency Director Michael Hayden joked about putting Edward Snowden on a kill list after learning of his nomination for a European Human Rights Award. Hayden said, quote, "I must admit, in my darker moments over the past several months, I'd also thought of nominating Mr. Snowden, but it was for a different list." Chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Chair Mike Rogers, responded, "I can help you with that." Ray McGovern, can you comment on this, and how is Edward Snowden getting by in Russia?
Well, I asked Ed whether he was aware of these suggestions, shall we say, that he'd be put on the kill list for assassination. He kind of winced and shook his head as if to say, my God, you know, what has our country become? It's unconscionable that these people would joke about things like that, but it shows the poverty of thought and the determination to make this, I call him a patriot, not a hero. Heroes can be dismissed. Edward Snowden's a patriot, okay? And it's easier to dismiss this fellow if you frontally attack him personally the way these folks have done. I want to say one more thing. Tom Drake, when he was acquitted, the judge upbraided the Justice Department, saying you had no business persecuting this person for 4 years. Guess what? Tom had an experience in Moscow when he met Ed Snowden, and I'm sure Tom was thinking, wow, I guess some good can come out of this, because it was Ed Snowden who freely said right up front that it was Tom's example. What happened to him by going through channels that persuaded Ed Snowden to seek a more circuitous route, and now he is in total safety, at least for this year.
Your thoughts very quickly on that, Tom Drake. We just have 10 seconds.
Well, I feel extraordinary kinship with Edward Snowden. I mean, he's held up the mirror to the government. He wants the Constitution restored. He wants the rule of law restored. He wants a surveillance state. disbanded. I mean, that's the reality. It's gone far beyond its mandate to deal with terrorism and other threats to the nation.
And finally, Sarah Harrison could be also very seriously endangered by all that she has done, targeted by the British and U.S. governments. Was there concern about this, Tom?
Yes, well, I mean, she sacrificed herself and essentially is, in her own way, under her own